Freedom Convoys. Who remembers the Canadian Freedom Convoys? Two of the veterans from that convoy flew to the United Kingdom to be with us yesterday before they flew here. So they flew specifically to London to meet us, to hand deliver this flag as a symbol, as a gesture of our unity across the world.
What's happening is such a challenge for all of us, but with all of us here together, we're going to get through this, and it's just going to get better and better. This is like the beginning of the snowball.
One of the things I hated about the pandemic and the lockdowns was it was as if every country was acting in lockstep. It's as if everyone was following Anthony Fauci or Theresa Tam in the United States and Canada, but they too were following the marching orders from the World Health Organization run by Dr. Tedros, and really underneath it all run by the Chinese Communist Party who installed Tedros. And what I think we should take away from that is that the decisions in your town, in your school, at your workplace, they were not made in your town, at your school, in your workplace. Odds are they were concocted at some non-democratic private meeting, either at some unelected health assembly in your country, or more likely at the global clearinghouse for those ideas, the World Health Organization. They're having their annual get-together called the World Health Assembly right now in Geneva, Switzerland. And so in response to that, I started seeing ads for a convoy, a trucker-style convoy, to come and protest against it. Now, the thing about the convoy in Canada is it was authentic and grassroots and organic, and it sprung up. Later, people tried to lead it. Some people tried to take credit for it, but it was real. I didn't feel that same authenticity here. It felt like a, hey, let's try and replicate the amazing Canadian trucker story. But nonetheless, I felt it was important to come to see the state of the counter-protest movement and to see if we could learn more about the World Health Organization pandemic treaty that they're hammering out behind closed doors at the UN. So we're based in Geneva for 2 days, and our goal is to learn what, if any, counter-protest movement exists in Europe in particular, because that's where we are. And secondly, to see if we can learn more about the pandemic treaty that the World Health Organization is trying to hammer out. Now, right now, I'm actually just over the border in France. Europe is so tiny, and there are very few actual borders. They're part of the European Union, so even though I have my passport on me, I didn't have to show it to go from Switzerland to France. It feels like Switzerland. The glorious mountains, the ski hills. You can see this monument here, the parish of Mijou. I'm in Mijou, France, with gratitude to Mary. And of course, the date 1944. Unlike Switzerland, France was a combatant in the Second World War and was occupied by the Nazis. I presume this statue was erected when Mijou ousted the Nazis. It's a reminder of how much history they have in Europe and how there is an underlying current of authoritarianism that must be watched. So we're here in Mijou, France, just across the border, because this was going to be the meeting place, the staging area for their convoy, and we wanted to see it. Would there be 5 people or 50 or 500 or 5,000? Well, the answer is closer to 5 than 5,000. People are still arriving, and there is going to be a communal dinner before we go down to Geneva. But I have to say, I don't think that there are even 100 people here. Now, it's the day before, and tomorrow there's going to be a protest event with a lot of speakers, including some that we recognize, Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. James Lindsay, so that'll be worth it to hear that. But let me tell you my observations at finding less than 100 people at the big counter protest. First of all, as I said before, I didn't really expect there to be a huge Canadian style convoy. You can't just conjure that up with some cool social media marketing. But I would say a few obvious things. First of all, it's not 2022. We're not in the middle of lockdowns and vaccine mandates. I think most people have moved on in their lives and psychologically. A lot of people have tried to forget how bad it was. Activists are still alert, but ordinary people have gone back to living. You can see this just in the number of people who still wear masks. I know that in Canada, I saw a tweet from CTV talking about a new COVID strain, and you see some media trying to whip it up, but really no one's buying it. There are some vaccine mandates still afoot in British Columbia, for example. So there are still problems to be mopped up. There are still some prosecutions of lockdown skeptics like Tamara Leach and Arthur Pavlovsky, but really they've run their course. So the first thing I notice is that the alarm, people being alarmed, people being watchdogs, people being on guard for authoritarian health impulses has really, the intensity has gone down by 95%, wouldn't you say? And I suppose that's good. People are getting on with their lives. But let me say this, while normal people are getting on with their lives, the so-called public health industry is planning for the next lockdown. I showed this video in a little bit earlier when I on the internet, but take a look at Theresa Tam, who is in Geneva for the World Health Assembly. Look at her talking about all the things she wants to do when, not if, the next pandemic comes. Look at this.
We must also step up our efforts to address systemic and historical discrimination against Indigenous peoples within our health systems. Gender equality is foundational to a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable future for all. Let us continue to fight racism, sexual and gender-based violence, and discrimination against marginalized groups, including 2S LGBTQI+ people, women, and girls. And let us renew our support for those on the front lines of care. We have a collective responsibility to ensure the protection of our healthcare workers and condemn the unacceptable attack on them and on health facilities. The many conflicts in the world, including Gaza and Ukraine, serve as stark reminders of the fragile nature of accessing critical health services. Canada urges all member states to support WHO's critical health emergencies work. A strong WHO must also be inclusive, reflecting the entire global community. This means supporting Taiwan's meaningful participation as an observer at the World Health Assembly. This week, we will collectively decide on next steps on both the pandemic agreement and on the IHR amendment and negotiations. Canada remains committed to continuing to work together to prevent and minimize the devastating consequences of future global health emergencies and pandemics, and to further advancing health equity for all. A meaningful pandemic agreement is consensus-based and one that member states can sign, ratify, and implement. Thank you very much.
So do you see what I mean? She didn't actually have a word to say about medicine or science. Everything she said was about politics and control and rules and ideology. She talked about racism and sexism. She talked about wars. She talked about DEI. She talked about LGBTQSL+. Because in public health, you have the excuse to legislate anything and everything and to destroy civil liberties in a way that we've never allowed it to happen before. There's another reason I think that this counter-protest intensity is at the very low end. And that's that there was a news story a couple of days ago that the World Health Assembly failed to finalize or agree on the language for the global pandemic treaty. And that's true. But they're not done. They're going to keep at it. You see, they do this permanently. It's not just their job, it's their career, it's their passion, it's their friend group, it's their way of traveling around the world from Switzerland to wherever the next meeting will be. And so I think the combination of us being a couple years out from the darkest days of the lockdown and the news story that, well, this public health meeting didn't accomplish the World Pandemic Treaty, well, maybe there's not that much to protest against. And I suppose that's true right now. But I'm here to say these folks are relentless. They're like that old movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, The Terminator. They can't be compromised with, they can't be bargained with. All they want is another lockdown. For you and me, COVID-19 was one of the worst things that ever happened to us. It destroyed our lifestyle, destroyed our income, destroyed our family connections, destroyed our sense of community, destroyed our civil liberties. It was the worst moment in many people's lives. But for the public health bureaucrats, especially the globalist ones who are not rooted to any jurisdiction, it was the best time of their lives. They had power, they had respect, they were on TV every day. Obscure, unknown nobodies like Dr. Theresa Tam were suddenly being called Canada's top doctor. Do you really think Theresa Tam is Canada's top doctor? She's Canada's political doctor. I bet she hasn't had a patient in a decade. Those people want another pandemic. Not that they want misery for its own sake. I wouldn't say that about them. But they want the misery so they can offer themselves up as the solution, themselves and their plans and their budgets and their powers. And that's why we're here just across the border from Geneva, Switzerland. We're here because the decisions being made for you, about you, are not happening in the Canadian Parliament or your local legislature. They're happening by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats, diplomats, and politicians at the United Nations. And we're here to follow that and see how it's going. Let's go in and meet the other convoy folks. And tomorrow we will meet the speakers of the protest. And that's what we expect to cover today and tomorrow. To see all my coverage on this story, go to nopandemictreaty.com. Myself and our videographer, Efron Monsanto, flew here on economy class tickets. If you want to help us chip in, please do. Cost us about $2,500 for the two of us to get here. Thanks.
As we were driving through here ourselves, I don't know what came up for you as you came into Misha, this beautiful part of the world. Part of me was thinking tomorrow we go to the rally and there's that fight energy and it's kind of like, maybe it's just really love that we need to bring to this. Maybe it's just that shift in our thinking, shift in our consciousness that we come and just deliver in Geneva where all of these powerful institutions are doing their thing, and we come in and do our thing, and we shift the energy, and perhaps we get in, we get out, and things start to change because we change. Tonight we've got some amazing guests. This flag that I'm wearing, you can tell I don't have a Canadian accent. This is one of the original flags, as you can see, well worn, well used. Wow. Freedom Convoys. Who remembers the Canadian Freedom Convoys? Two of the veterans from that convoy flew to the United Kingdom to be with us yesterday before they flew here. So they flew specifically to London to meet us, to hand deliver this flag as a symbol, as a gesture of our unity across the world.
What's happening is such a challenge for all of us, but with all of us here together, we're going to get through this, and it's just going to get better and better. This is like the beginning of the snowball.
Get up, stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up for your rights. Don't give up the fight. Don't give up the fight. Don't give up the fight. Thank you.